Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Wednesday, February 8th, 2017 edition of VR News. Lots to talk about, lots of gaming stuff. Let's start with a game that I have not mentioned probably in about 10 years. And the game is called Hellgate London. It's from Flagship Studios. It's got a bit of a history. It's a roguelike game, which, the classic roguelike formula, and was released as an MMO game. The company Flagship Studios then goes out of business, and a Korean company called Hanbitsoft swoops in. They buy the intellectual property, rip out the London maps, rebrand it, the whole game, as having more of a Korean flavor, using downtown Seoul maps, for example. They've rebranded, then they relaunched it as a free-to-play MMO for the Asian market. There were some rumblings a couple of years ago about greenlighting in Steam. That never came to pass. And basically now is the first time in a long time that we're hearing about the game again. Apparently the intellectual property holders are working on a virtual reality version of the game. And where I think that would be a good fit is, and we all know people like this. You guys may or may not, but it could be yourself or somebody you know. I know my buddy Exity, he's one of these where 20 to 30 minutes VR max, then he taps out. It's not motion sickness, but he looks like he's run a marathon. He's just drained and he needs recovery time, right? Definitely not me, but I can understand that. Again, roguelikes really well suited to those quick bursts of play. So that should be an interesting game. Next game from Crow Team, the guys behind Serious Sam. So I wasn't shy about not liking the first Serious Sam. I thought it was a little too wavy and I didn't like it. The second one, which was a VR version of the first game, I love that one. I love the locomotion, and it was the first, other than BFG Doom 3, it was one of the rare FPS translations to VR that works, in my opinion. Now they're coming out with VR versions of the second and third original Serious Sam games too, which will be cool. And a third game called the Talos Principle, which is slower paced and puzzle orientated. Now this next game release, guys, bit of a head scratcher, and help me figure this one out. So it's Crytek's Robinson The Journey, which we know was a launch title for PlayStation VR. You use the motion controllers. Apparently coming to the Oculus Store, which is great, but without touch support. Now, I understand having gamepad support. You want to cater to those people who don't have the motion controllers. But I would have thought it would have been a dual because they had just programmed, that ability for the touch controllers in the Climb. They have the code base, but whatever the reason, it's gamepad only at launch. Hopefully it's something they add post-launch at some point. I think it would play really well with the touch controllers. And no word on a Vive version, unfortunately. Hopefully that's coming. I kind of wish that would have been a Steam VR version. Play it on both there. All right, Project Cars 2. We know the first game, and I wouldn't call myself a hardcore racing sim guy, but I like it enough to want to play with a steering wheel and pedals, for example. I like Project Cars. I liked it a lot. Dirt Rally and some of the other ones were great as well. And we've talked to death about how cockpit games work pretty well in VR. Apparently, Project Cars 2, according to the author who got to try it, has the potential for not just being the best VR racing game, but one of the best racing simulators, period, ever, which is massively lofty praise. And you know what? I'll be happy if it's just a fun VR experience. Like I said, I enjoyed the first one, but it wasn't built from the ground up to support VR. It was kind of thrown in after. This one is from the ground up. So hopefully what that means, it'll be a lot more optimized and, take things into account that the first one never did. It's going to be coming out for Rift and Vive, Xbox One and PS4, but no word on PlayStation VR yet. No word on price and exact release date from Slightly Mad Studios either. This next story, a perfect example. So we had a lot of discussion based on last night's video or yesterday's video, depending on where you get it and what time. Few conversations in the comment section I had with you guys. We talked about sensationalist headlines, and we talked about clickbaiting, like frequent things that came up. And this is a perfect example, probably not classic clickbaiting, but definitely sensationalist when it doesn't have to be. The same article, or the same topic rather, written by two different authors dealing with the same topic. Listen to the difference in the headlines. So the first is CNET reporting this, and their headline reads, "Is VR in trouble?" ? Facebook closes hundreds of demo stations at Best Buy? ? Yeah, I was intentional with the voice. Here's the Upload VR version. Same topic. Oculus refocuses Best Buy Rift demos on larger markets. That doesn't mean they're, the first guys maybe aren't telling the truth, but when you use question marks, something tells me it's probably not been vetted with a high degree of accuracy. So where is the truth? Probably somewhere in the middle. But what I do take them at face value with is their statement that, look, we've had 500 of these stations out there. We know which ones are working and which ones aren't. We're just taking the ones that haven't been successful and doubling down in the areas that we were successful. Now, the main reason I take them at face value is this is literally the proverbial drop in the bucket for these guys. This is not a massive expense by any means. It would be a footnote of a footnote on a financial statement. It's probably just reshuffling marketing efforts, of which there have been very few the last year. So yeah, I don't necessarily think it's sinister. I do think there's probably a bit of truth to both, but it has more to do with just having hardware sitting idle than really anything grander or sinister. But I could be wrong. Next story, also dealing with Oculus. This time Mark Zuckerberg again. Thought we were finished with him for a while with the trial, but he's back. And it was a discussion that he had with investors, basically, where he said it's not going to be really profitable for us, VR that is, for quite a while. And I bring this up because there was some interesting statements that Zuckerberg made that I then wanted to vet, and I'll tell you the results of that. So he basically gave the chicken and egg thing to the investors, right? That, look, if you're a AAA game developer, there's only so many units out there, you're probably not going to make your money back. But how do you get the units out there if you don't have the games? Again, classic chicken and egg. So what he said is, I don't think there's really a strategy to pull VR's trajectory in from 10 years to 5. I just think it's going to be a 10-year thing. The analogy I always use, the first smartphones came out in 2003, the BlackBerry and the Palm Trio, and it took 10 years to get to 1 billion units. And the first year resulted in just hundreds of thousands of units sold. That was the part that I wanted to vet. Because if he had said that just a few months prior when the news was already bad in terms of, original optimistic predictions, it wouldn't have carried much weight for me. In fact, and I've got the link below, he said that in November of 2015. Therefore, yes, you can at least trust him in that he did say that. Was he wishing for higher numbers in his heart? Probably. Did others at the company, hold out hope that it was going to be in the millions? Most assuredly. But he did at least give himself that out by saying hundreds of thousands. So whatever else is lurking there, that part was accurate. Next news story, a bit more techie based. This one involves rendering in virtual reality. So just a reminder, there's always timestamps in the description. If you're not into a specific story, skip on right by and ignore it completely. The rest of you, here goes. So there was a statement circulating from Nvidia that the key performance indicators for VR are a little tricky because you have to render at 90 frames per second, which essentially means 7 to 8 times the amount of throughput. Well, Upload VR has a podcast rather. I listened to it during my work commute today, episode 33, about that statement and more. And they spoke to Dominic Eskofier from Nvidia, and he explained that 7 to 8 times. So what he said was, look, your typical gaming monitor, 30 frames per second, results in about 60 megapixels pushed through the pipeline each second. If we render for VR, that is 2 screens with full HD or more, plus both at a stable 90 frames per second, remember no reprojection, we're up to 450 megapixels per second. That's the 7 to 8 times figure. So that was neat. And the podcast gets into other ways they can recoup performance other than just sheer GPU horsepower, which is really the more interesting aspect of this podcast. So if that's your thing, link below, have a listen. They get into some pretty good stuff. This next story concerns E3 for 2017. For the first time, it's going to be open to the public. So Joe Public can buy a ticket. Tickets will go up Monday, February the 13th at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and up to 15,000 people are going to be able to purchase. So tickets are priced at $250 US or $150 for early bird discounts, and that'll give you access to the show floor, panel discussions, and other related event areas. Now, what that probably wouldn't cover is stuff like Electronic Arts. So they're no longer part of formal E3, but they usually set up shop, in an adjoining building or a building nearby. So there's going to be other venue possibilities as well if you go. So very cool. Takes place June 13th to the 15th per normal. Smack dab in the middle of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So again, that's E3 2017, available to all this time, not just industry insiders. Now, this next story, Hideo Kojima from Metal Gear Solid fame. Talked about him last December 27th, his about face with VR. He suddenly starting to become a bit of a VR evangelist and is working on VR stuff. He kind of strengthened those statements today. And he basically said that it's a powerful medium that has the ability to not only change games, but our lives. It'll have a large impact on our culture at large. And what I thought was interesting about this is I've always just kind of in my own strange and twisted head thought of him as the console Chris Roberts. And what I mean by that is if you look at the Wing Commander series and compare that against the Metal Gear Solid series, there's one familiarity that you just cannot escape from, and that is cinematics. In both series, they got progressively more and more until they got to the point, Metal Gear Solid, the latest one aside, right? All the others, more and more video. I think there's something circulating out there. There's actually a cutscene movie for 4 out there somewhere. Should have vetted that before this, but I just find it neat from that aspect, because that leads me to my final parting shot at Hideo, which would be, that is fantastic, and I appreciate your enthusiasm, but now please go make a game in VR. Thank you. Bye. Hopefully he is. And this last story, VR underwater. So there's a company that has made a waterproof Google Cardboard. Their hope is to market a kit for that. At first, I kind of just chuckled and didn't think much of it. Who's going to use that? Then I realized, okay, NASA. And then I thought, yeah, that's not really going to help sales. You got, a few dozen units there. Then I thought more about it. Rescue personnel, Coast Guard divers, right? Forensic divers, Navy SEALs, vets. There's actually a lot of potential for an underwater VR device. So I take that back. There you go. Link for that below as well. Guys, that is it for the Wednesday news. Some welcome gaming from me next. As always, cheers.